Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the US election. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson.
And I'm Laura Buckwell, and you're watching W News. Broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters, here are our top stories.
As the clock ticks down to the 2024 presidential election, Kamala Harris holds events in Pennsylvania. That's a state both campaigns view as critical to their chances.
Donald Trump takes his final bid to 3 key battleground states, closing out his campaign in Michigan, the same city where he ended his 2016 campaign.
And national and swing state polling shows the race too close to call in what's being slated as the tightest race in more than 2 decades.
Thank you for joining us.
Great to have you with us for the next couple of hours.
Yes, now with only 1 day until the US presidential election, both campaigns have entered a final push, with candidates and their teams pouring every last ounce of energy into winning over critical swing state voters. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and her Republican rival Donald Trump are each making strategic stops in key battlegrounds to secure any remaining undecided votes and to solidify support among their base.
On Sunday, Kamala Harris concentrated her efforts on Michigan. That's a state considered essential to a Democratic victory, where she engaged with voters and emphasized her campaign's key messages on the economy, healthcare, and unity. Well, Harris's team has strategically focused on Michigan due to its high stakes, as it's one of the states that could determine the overall outcome of the election.
Meanwhile, Trump spent Sunday campaigning across multiple swing states, including North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Each of these states represents a vital component of Trump's path to re-election, and his campaign has made an all-out effort to hold on to these states by emphasizing themes of economic recovery and strong national defense, aiming to sway any wavering voters.
Well, on the final day before the election, Kamala Harris is spending time exclusively in Pennsylvania. That's a state that both campaigns view as being critical to their chances. Well, Harris's Pennsylvania events will include a series of rallies and meet and greets designed to maximize voter turnout, particularly in urban areas. Well, her final push will culminate in a high-profile Get Out the Vote event this evening, where she'll be joined by a lineup of celebrities, including Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin, Just Blaze, and Oprah Winfrey. That's with the aim of energizing the crowds in this fiercely contested state. Well, later on, Harris will also appear in Pittsburgh, where she'll be joined by additional star supporters, including D-Nice, Katy Perry, and Andra Day.
Meanwhile, Trump has also mapped out a rigorous schedule for the last day of the campaign. He kicked off his day in North Carolina with a morning rally to engage his supporters there, reiterating his administration's accomplishments and emphasizing his vision for the country if re-elected. From there, Trump will also travel to Pennsylvania, where he will hold multiple events, including a rally in Reading, just west of Philadelphia, and another in Pittsburgh. Finally, Trump will close out his day with a rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the same city where he ended his 2016 campaign.
Well, as both campaigns draw to a close, the intense activity underscores just how high the stakes are in this election, with both candidates making every possible effort to gain a final edge in these last few hours, to become the 47th president of the United States of America.
But there are already concerns about election integrity and the fear of protests and violence in the days ahead, as Nick Harper reports from Washington.
The final appearances in a race that's deadlocked. On Sunday, former President Donald Trump pressed his case for a second term in 3 swing states. But he sowed seeds of doubt about the voting process.
They are fighting so hard to steal this damn thing. Look at what's going on. Look at what's going on in your state. Every day, they're talking about extending hours and stuff. Who ever heard of this stuff? We should have one-day voting and paper ballots.
In Michigan, Kamala Harris pushed back on those claims.
I would ask, in particular, people who have not yet voted, to not fall for his tactic, which I think includes suggesting to people that if they vote, their vote won't matter. Suggesting to people that somehow the integrity of our voting system is not intact.
As well as fears about election integrity, there is also anxiety about violence. Trump on Sunday talked about another possible assassination attempt and the shooting of journalists.
To get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much.
For now, just breathe.
Many Americans are now trying to find some calm amid the political storm.
Spend time with people you love, do things outside, take time away from phones. And that's the biggest thing, just not sitting in front of the TV as much as you can.
But no matter who wins, polls show 60% of voters believe the country will remain divided. Trump and Harris are still hoping to win over undecided voters on this final day of campaigning. Trump is barnstorming through North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Michigan, while Harris is staying in Pennsylvania, the state which many believe will hold the keys to the White House. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Our chief correspondent Simon Marks joins us live from Washington, D.C. now. Simon, great to have you here as always. Now the clock is ticking, only hours to go now. What is the general feeling and atmosphere like over in Washington right now?
Well, I think, Laura, there's just tremendous tension and anxiety here, as you can imagine, because all the signs still suggest that this is a very evenly poised election, a deadlocked race. We're on a knife edge here as we wait to see what happens over the course of the final full day of campaigning and then, of course, the final full day of voting, election day itself. It is extraordinary, though, to hear some of those cadences that we heard in Nick's report from Donald Trump. They sound so similar to what he was saying back in 2020 about irregularities in the voting system, trying to foment a sense among his supporters that this election is already being stolen from him. Both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, completely lawyered up to the hilt. The Republicans already filing lawsuits in various parts of the country, claiming that they have already found some irregularities. And remember that the Republicans are hiring, fanning out across the country, 100,000 observers, what they call election integrity monitors, who are, according to the Republicans, simply going to look and watch polling as it takes place. But it is evident that some of those observers, even in the early in-person voting that's been taking place across the country, have been raising questions about things that have been taking place. And indeed, several people have told me that for the first time in their voting lives, they have actually had the signatures on their postal ballots queried up in New York, here in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. So I think that Donald Trump is setting the stage already for suggesting that he didn't lose the election if Kamala Harris is declared the winner. But Democrats, too, as the Vice President has indicated, absolutely determined to fight on this issue of election integrity if and when it does get raised once the votes are cast and counted.
Well, it does seem that it's getting a bit more complicated as the hours roll past, as you mentioned. So now, once the polls close, it's been said that it could be a matter of hours, weeks, or even months before we find out who the next president of the United States will be. How and when will we actually find out who's won then?
I mean, the answer to that question is impossible to gauge because we simply don't know if the polls are accurate or not. Democrats are exuding confidence about the outcome of this race. They point to the fact that Kamala Harris is viewed as with more popularity than Donald Trump by the national electorate. They look at the pace of early voting that's taken place. They believe that there is a move, particularly among women voters, hewing in Kamala Harris's direction. And there are some suggestions by some Democrats that this thing is not going to be close, that this could be a traditional Kamala Harris landslide, the kind of election outcome that we've not seen in the United States since 2016. Republicans equally are saying they don't think it's close. They think Donald Trump is going to win it easily. So both parties are playing the expectation game here. And for the pollsters, perhaps almost more than the politicians, these are very nervous hours that lie ahead, because it's going to give us a gauge of how accurate these polls have been that suggest literally there's a 50-50 chance of either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris becoming America's next president.
As you mentioned, a very nervous few hours coming up. Well, for the last 2 days, Trump and Harris have been touring key states in the final bid for the White House. Polls show that 78 million people voted early. So will these last-ditch attempts really make much difference? What do you think?
Well, it's a great question. It's a key question. And just to put that number into perspective, there are roughly 162 million registered voters in the United States, and roughly 80 million have already cast their ballot. So we're at a point where over half the registered electorate has already participated in this election, and the country normally only sees a turnout rate of around 65% in a presidential election. So you could argue most voters that are going to participate in this election have done so before Election Day. Nonetheless, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris going for every single last vote they can find in those battleground states, because they know, Pennsylvania particularly, where the Vice President is spending her entire day today, absolutely could be the state that makes the difference. And it could be the thinnest of margins in the tiniest of communities. And that's why we're seeing targeted messaging, including Kamala Harris saying to Democrats, wavering Democrats in Michigan last night, that she is going to take action as president to end the crisis in Gaza, end the war there, and advance the prospects for peace negotiations between the Israelis, the Palestinians, and others. So she's fighting tooth and nail, as is Donald Trump, for every single possible vote that they think might be able to make the difference, even though the participation in the early election this time around is off the charts.
Some brilliant updates there. We cannot thank you enough, as always, for joining us. Simon Marks there, live from Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm joined now by the former White House press secretary and communications director under President Trump, Sean Spicer. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Just looking back to the year 2017, you were a White House press secretary for about 6 months. And when you left, Donald Trump said, Mr. Spicer is a wonderful person. His future is bright. Have you both remained on good terms?
Very much so. The president a few weeks ago. He's been supportive of my post-White House career. I've written books. I was on a reality TV show. He's extremely supportive in all of those efforts. Yeah.
It was said at the time, though, and subsequently, that you sometimes felt you were blindsided by Mr. Trump. First of all, is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the President Trump didn't operate in a traditional manner. He leads the way. There's no question. I wouldn't say the word blindsided, but I would say that normally it's much more coordinated, as you see President Trump still today. Puts out truth socials, he makes statements, he shoots from the hip. That's what makes him who he is. And frankly, I grew up very traditional in how things operated, and President Trump broke the norms. You think about what just happened just in our country Saturday night, right? This reality sort of, I don't even know how to classify it, show put Kamala Harris on it at the last, which they said they wouldn't do, and that there would be a violation of, and Trump fought under our laws, under our DC laws, to get equal time, and NBC had to cave to him and give him free time during a NASCAR race yesterday. I mean, he breaks all norms, and for a lot of us, we just weren't used to it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's nothing conventional about Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. But what I was really getting at here when I asked about the word blindsided is, did you get the feeling that Trump actually listened to his inner sanctum of advisors? Did you feel he was paying attention to what he was being told, or was there a lot of shooting from the hip?
Oh, no, I didn't feel it. I saw it. This is one of the biggest misconceptions of Donald Trump. He listens to people. The problem is that you have two groups that are making their case. Obviously, one wins and one loses. And what happened under Trump and still happens is that the group that loses the argument goes out and says, he didn't listen to me. He listens to, I mean, you know, like as in most arguments, there's two sides to the coin. So sometimes go in and make the case on something. Usually somebody else would argue against me unless there was universal agreement on it. Sometimes he sided with me. Sometimes he didn't. Sometimes on policy decisions, he'd side with one group versus another. Sometimes he'd change his mind. But this perception that he doesn't listen is just, it's something that is a sort of a media narrative about how he operates.
Sure, but we have had, hadn't we, 200 former Republican senior officials come forward and voice real concerns about Donald Trump and his leadership, and they've even advised people not to vote for him again. Do you think that were he to win again, he'd have a good quality of advisors in his sort of inner sanctum, people around him who would steer him in the right direction?
I do. And I just want to say something about the list you mentioned. I don't want to impugn, all of them. Some of them I know, some of them I don't. But I would just say that I think a lot of people came to work in the Trump administration, really never liked Donald Trump, but kind of liked the idea of being in charge of a department or an agency or implement something that they'd always want to do, and forgot that he was the guy that had gotten elected and that they were there to serve and implement his agenda. And I saw that over and over again, where there were a lot of people who wanted to implement their own agenda. They didn't like how he operated. They didn't like some of the things he thought. And the way it works in this country is when you put your name on a ballot, if you win, you get to hire people that sort of work to implement your policies and your agenda, not the other way around. And I noticed a lot of people who wanted to come to Washington to implement their agenda, not his, and they didn't like it when there was resistance to that. And I think he's gotten a lot wiser to that, and will make choices, especially in key personnel areas, that are much more aligned with people who want to get things done in accordance with the promises that he's the American people.
Yeah, just one last question about sort of people management skills, because I mean, if the Donald Trump presidency had been a company, and we look at your own case, you were in the White House administration for 6 months, we'd say, and you're not an isolated example, we'd say that was a company with a bit of a retention issue. Why do you think that is? First of all, do you agree with that? And if so, why do you think that is, that people just seem to be not necessarily sticking around for all that long? Secretaries of State spring to mind.
Yeah, well, I would say this. In some cases, it was true. I made a decision. Donald Trump had asked me to stay. I made a decision that I thought it was best to get out of the way and allow sort of, there to be a start, if you will, especially with respect to the press. So I looked at that in terms of what I thought was in the best interest of the country and his administration. I didn't want to make it about me. He had asked me to stay on. I think initially, look, when people get elected in the U.S., generally they come with a group of advisors. So they've been a senator, a governor, et cetera. They've had a staff. They have lobbyists that have been part of their orbit, if you will. Donald Trump had never been in politics before. And I think there was a lot of people who wanted to come into government, as I said, some selfishly for their own reasons, some because they wanted to implement an agenda, some because they thought it would be a good fit and didn't know what to expect. And some worked out, some didn't. Some went off in their own direction. But as you notice, there are plenty that stayed for the full 4 years, too, both in White House positions and then in agency or department positions. I think this time he learned his lesson a lot more. I think people who want to serve in this administration understand what it's going to take, and there's going to be a big difference in the people that he surrounds himself with. And it's a two-way street, as I mentioned. I think the people who go in learned that that it's about him. But I will take issue with one thing. You said if you were to judge it like a company. When I look at companies that I want to invest in, I don't necessarily look at the personnel turnover. Sometimes you do. But I look at is the company successful? have they gotten things done? And at the end of the day, when you look at Donald Trump's 4 years, whether it's domestic policy, keeping our borders secure, getting taxes cut, regulations reduced, a whole host of things, or foreign policy, and look at the lack of chaos that existed that we now see under 4 years of Joe Biden, it has been a huge success. So I judge the success of an administration by what they got done for the American people. Are we more prosperous? Are we safer? Is the country stronger? And I don't think that there's any question about where we are as a country under Donald Trump than where we are now under Harris and Biden.
Just lastly, Sean, I just want to quote you on something you said on X in the last couple of hours. You said, quote unquote, yeah, right, to the suggestion that Harris might come out on top. What makes you so sure Donald Trump's going to win this time?
A couple things. One, the data. When you look at the early vote, which is, I mean, look, at the end of the day, this is all about votes, right? You can be up or down, but you need people to actually go vote for you. And you look at how we're doing in the early vote in these key battleground states. And in every one of them, every single one of them, Republicans are exceeding where they've done in the past. And Democrats are coming up short in key constituencies that they need. So, for example, black men in the Atlanta suburbs, in the Milwaukee suburbs, young students are turning up less for them. So there's a lot of key constituencies where they're not doing what they should be doing, and we are exceeding it. I'll give you Nevada as one example. We lost the early vote there in 2020 by 45,000 votes. We're now up 35,000. That's a 70,000 vote swing in favor of Republicans. You look at the registration numbers in these key states, all moving in the right direction. You look at the trend in the polls, all of it moving in Donald Trump's direction. Now, I'm not just talking about one poll, because you can go cherry pick, hey, here's Harris up. Yeah, I get that. But you look overall where the momentum is. And in every one of the 7 battleground states, it's with Trump. The data supports that.
Sure, and we're going to be speaking to a pollster in the next 20 minutes or so. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary.
It's going to be a fun day here in America tomorrow.
All right, well, thank you very much again. Thank you.
You bet.
Well, for more on the Republican nominee, we're joined now by the former deputy assistant and strategist to Donald Trump, Sebastian Gorka. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Trump and Harris are both sure they're going to win this, and it's being dubbed the most consequential election in living memory. One of them is going to be disappointed. Which one?
I don't do predictions because nobody is held to them after they make the predictions. But if you talk to actual real pollsters, ones that I trust, like Rich Barish, the People's Pundit, or Robert Cahaley of Trafalgar Polling, the trend lines are giving this to President Trump. You look at the battleground states, you look at you look at very, very telling indices, such that Kamala Harris a week ago canceled millions of dollars of advertising in the state of North Carolina, basically surrendering that state to the president. And if we don't have inordinate cheating from the Democrats, then President Trump looks in very, very fine fettle for tomorrow.
Okay, we're in what's called, the final sprint phase today. I mean, obviously, 24 hours, less than 24 hours of campaigning remain. We've got these 3 to 5% undecided voters. And I just want to ask your opinion whether last-ditch efforts like what we're going to be seeing today actually make a meaningful difference based on what you've seen over the years.
It's all about mobilization. And what's unique about this election is that thanks to the great work of people like Lara Trump, the Republican National Committee, and volunteers like Scott Pressler and Turning Point Action, Charlie Kirk's organization, we've broken the back of the tradition that conservatives only vote on election day, that we want to go to the ballot station, we want to pick our ballot, fill it out, and we want to put it by hand into that ballot box. That's gone. That's dead. That tradition, which seemed ironclad, is ceased to be. We have truly record early voting in predominantly Republican strongholds. My wife, who recently became the chair for the Republican Party in the biggest county in Virginia, she's seeing 200% early voter turnout compared to prior elections, predominantly in conservative rural districts. That's where the action's at. It's about mobilization. The last few hours or the last 24 hours is not as important as having millions of Americans vote early. However, I will add this. If you're a traditionalist, get to the polls tomorrow.
I'm assuming you watched and listened to Donald Trump's speeches yesterday on Sunday. One of them, I think it was the first of the three in Pennsylvania, went on for about 90 minutes. And during that speech, I mean, it appeared he went off-piste, off-script, although I would like to ask your opinion about that. But he also listed a whole lot of grievances. He's being prosecuted, he cited voter fraud, he called America a crooked country, he directed anger at the press. Is that sensible? Is it advisable to be that negative in your messaging on the eve of the wrap-up of the campaign? I just want to know your opinion from a strategic point of view.
Well, let's just tell the truth first. He didn't call America crooked. He called the regime of Harris and Biden crooked. And he has every right to do so, and he should do so. Let's be clear, my former boss, for whom I opened in his Milwaukee rally on Friday, I was on the stage before him, my boss former boss is facing 730 years in prison for no crime, made-up crime, manufactured crimes. Now, he's the leader of the opposition. He garnered more votes for any incumbent president in history. That kind of behavior by the Department of Justice and by local prosecutors would be fine in Venezuela or North Korea, but not in America. And he's very clear that when he talks about the use of the judicial system for political purposes, it's not really about him. His famous line is, "It's about you. I'm just in the way." And he's absolutely right. Look at what we've witnessed. Look at the police state Gestapo tactics we've witnessed in the last 4 years. There is a woman currently serving prison time who's a 72-year-old grandmother, and her offense was praying inside Congress on January the 6th. A woman, a grandmother, who went into Congress to pray for 6 minutes and then left. I had the husband of a beautiful black mother on my show recently who has a lovely little daughter, a 3-year-old daughter. She has just been given a 35-month prison sentence for standing outside an abortion clinic by the federal prosecution of the Department of Justice. That is a police state. So you're damn right we have to stop it, and President Trump is the only one who can.
I just want to stand by what I said because I've got the transcript of what Donald Trump said in front of me. He said, "Our country is a crooked country, okay? It's a crooked country. We're going to make it straight." That's exactly what he said. So I stand by what I said. I'd like to just ask you, though, about foreign policy, because foreign policy is not something that I believe is very high up the list of priorities for the average voter. The average voter, according to polls, ranked foreign policy around 14th on the list of priorities, far below the economy, far below immigration. But when it comes to bringing peace to Ukraine and Gaza, for example, Donald Trump says he can deliver on that. Let's start with Ukraine. How do you see Donald Trump delivering peace? Because he says he can do that on day one.
Well, it'll probably happen before he's inaugurated, just as the hostages from Iran were on their way back on a jetliner as President Reagan was being sworn in after the disastrous Carter years. That's exactly the kind of scenario we're looking for if, God willing, the Patriots win tomorrow and President Trump is the president-elect. Look, I'm not going to give away any inside baseball here. I'll just repeat what the president has said in his almost 260 rallies in the last few months. He will make it very clear that the killing has to stop. And it's inordinate levels of absolute Armageddon in Ukraine. It's got to stop. And he will tell the president of Ukraine, you will negotiate. I know it's tough with the Donbass and the Crimea, but we have to negotiate. And then behind closed doors, he will say the same thing to that former KGB colonel who's afraid of my former boss. And he will say, Putin, you will negotiate as well, or the last 4 years of what America provided to Ukraine will look like a picnic. And as such, those men will sit down and negotiate. That is one thing I am prepared to guarantee for you.
OK, that's Ukraine. I wanted to ask you about Gaza and Lebanon, of great interest to our viewers here on Al Arabiya News. Just tell us, what can Donald Trump bring to the table? Because, again, the situation in the Middle East, especially with regards to Gaza, is something we've heard President Donald Trump saying he can fix it. He's got the solution. Does he really?
Well, I find this question very amusing about, what could he do in the Middle East, or how could he do anything about Ukraine? And it's like, were you in a coma when we were in the White House? I mean, it's quite stunning. For 4 years, when my former boss was the commander-in-chief, sat behind the Resolute desk, we had no new wars. In fact, we had historic peace in the Middle East, thanks to the Abraham Accords negotiated by his son-in-law Jared and by our Israeli ambassador, the great David Friedman. I always laugh when people say, what would your boss do about Ukraine? It wouldn't have stinking happened because Vladimir Putin is afraid of President Trump. When we were in the White House, we informed the president there are 300 Russian mercenaries working for the Kremlin, running around the Middle East, destabilizing that region. President Trump said, oh, really? Kill them all. As a result, in the Battle of Kasham, 300 Wagner Group mercenaries working for Vladimir Putin were turned into red mist in the 5-hour battle. What did Putin do? He didn't even hold a press conference to complain. That's how afraid he was. The same goes for the Middle East. Because of the swinging sanctions that we put in place, the Iranian regime, the murderous mullahs, were on their knees economically by the end of our administration. In just 9 months, the Tehran Stock Exchange had lost 50% of its value, the whole stock exchange. And if we'd been allowed to continue our policies in the second Trump administration, the Iranian regime would have collapsed, and the proud people of Persia and the other ethnic groups in Iran would have taken back their country. So it's going to be the reinitiation of that sanctions regime, standing shoulder to shoulder with Netanyahu, not trying to undermine him as Harris, as Kamala and Biden has, and telling Iran that we have a new sheriff, or the old sheriff, rather, is back in town.
Do you sometimes hear Donald Trump speaking, for example, during yesterday's rally or indeed at any other time, and think to yourself, as a strategist, that was an ill-considered or an ill-advised remark or an ill-advised strategy or comment that he outlined there? Do you ever do that?
No, because he speaks the truth. I mean, when I first met Mr. Trump in 2015, within seconds before he hired me to be his advisor, I realized that this is a man who loves his country and hates political correctness. This is why he was elected. Think about this historic event. In 2016, for the first time in the history of the Republic, we elected somebody who's not a politician or a retired general. It's never happened. Why did we do that? Why did 64 million Americans say, screw the swamp, screw the political class? We want somebody who speaks their mind. That's why they elected President Trump, because they don't want a Janus-faced, two-faced snake as is usual in this city. That's why he speaks his mind, and that's why we are seeing record voting figures, especially from first-time voters, because they've had it with career politicians.
Do you think, I mean, it's unlikely, according to a lot of the pollsters we've been speaking to, that we will have a clear result within 24 hours of the vote finishing. We don't know that for sure, but pollsters are telling us it doesn't look like, being as close it is, we'll have a clear outcome. So feel free to comment on that. But if we don't have a clear outcome, do you see Donald Trump perhaps following the advice of Steve Bannon and claiming victory on Tuesday night, even if it's not assured? Or do you see him conceding in the event that it's narrow, but it is actually, in the end, a victory for Kamala Harris? Do you think he will concede?
Are these the same pollsters who said Hillary Clinton had a 93% chance of winning in 2016?
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I didn't hear what you said.
Are these the same pollsters who on the eve of the 2016 election said Hillary Clinton has a 93% chance of winning?
It could very well be.
Yeah. You ask them.
Okay. But when it comes to conceding, that's not something that the pollsters are likely to be able to say very much about. Do you think knowing...
Well, you're the one who's you're the one who's saying that it's their figures that means they won't be able to declare a winner. Why do I have to?
But if it's a close outcome, and there have to be recounts.
But what if it's not? What if it's not? So what if it's not? I mean, we are seeing, again, let me be clear here. We've broken the back of the proclivity to not vote early. We're seeing record voting numbers for first-time voters for President Trump, and we're seeing blowout figures in rural areas. And right now, even the mainstream pollsters say President Trump has all 7 of the battleground states. So maybe you should get an advisor to Kamala Harris and ask her if she's prepared to concede.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Former Deputy Assistant and Strategist to Donald Trump, Sebastian Gorka. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're joined now by the former Assistant Secretary of State under President Barack Obama, PJ Crowley. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, PJ. You were quite quick to point out before Biden dropped out of the race that he had to do so. I saw that on your X feed. You said this before there was any indication that he was going to do so, and it was quite an unpopular thing to say at the time, wasn't it? I just want to ask you, 100 days to turn around the race is what Harris has had. How do you rate her performance?
Well, it's an historic campaign, and I think she's done as well as one could expect. You know, go back to July, and it was fairly clear that President Biden, while he's had a successful presidency, you know, was unlikely, you know, to defeat Donald Trump. And here we are on the eve of the American election, and the race is virtually tied. So the good news for Kamala Harris is that she has made up that lost ground. You know, the bad news or the uncertain news is that, you know, in basketball terminology, the election is a jump ball.
Well, Kamala Harris made her closing pitch in battleground Michigan on Sunday. What exactly stood out for you?
It is a pivotal state. You know, and right now, if she has a lead in Michigan, it is extraordinarily narrow. I think the challenge for a state like Michigan and a state like Pennsylvania will be turnout. You know, it's extraordinarily close. And the backdrop of this, of course, is that we've had consecutive elections in 2016 and 2020 that pivoted on a relatively small number of votes in 2, 3, or 4 states. So if we're thinking about election night, Kamala Harris undoubtedly needs Pennsylvania, probably needs Michigan. And so, you know, we'll have to wait 24 or 48 hours to see if her closing argument made a difference.
Well, of course, it's the last day of campaigning. So how much of a difference can be made really in the final days and hours?
Well, what's unusual about American elections, you know, in 2020 in particular, and now in 2024, is you've had a significant number of people, tens of millions of people, who have voted early. Now, depending on the state, you know, some of those votes have already been counted. Some of those will not be counted until election day. So this is a different dynamic in recent years than we've had in past elections. So I think we can say, you know, that there is a great deal of passion on both sides. I think in 2020, President Trump was skeptical of early voting, and it probably hurt him in the polls. He has encouraged his supporters to go out and vote, and many have. You know, so we already see a great deal of turnout, and that needs to continue tomorrow. And whichever side turns out more voters will obviously be the winner.
Yeah, PJ, we had a guest just a short while ago who suggested that a lot of that early turnout momentum, all of those early voters, as far as they were concerned, were going to be voting Republican. We were told that this was happening mainly in conservative parts of the United States. Is that what do you concur with that?
I'm a little skeptical. Certainly, there are more Republicans voting early than we saw in 2020. But the analysis that I've seen suggests that more Democrats are voting early, and so we have this dilemma. Tomorrow, early in the evening, as votes are being counted, it is quite likely in 2024, just as in 2020, that Donald Trump has an early lead, and as early voting continues through the evening and those votes begin to be cast, I would expect the majority of those votes to be for Kamala Harris, and that will narrow a Trump lead that is more likely than not early in the evening. And then how he reacts to this will be I would expect that he will not concede. I will expect, like he did in 2020, he'll suggest he's the winner before that is known. And we've seen this playbook in 2020, and I expect him to repeat it in 2024.
Sure. And I just wanted to ask you, whether you are fearful that we're going to see, given how the Trump presidency ended, whether you think perhaps we will see violence in the next, let's say, 48 hours if the vote doesn't go the way people want it to. And I'm just wondering where you see any signs of violence coming from.
Well, a lot depends on how votes are counted and how rapidly states are declared. It is entirely possible that at the end of election night, we will not know who the winner is. Remember, it was 2, 3, or 4 days before, in 2020, before we knew the official result in Pennsylvania. So I do think that we will experience a period of uncertainty where votes are being counted and people are getting impatient. I think the difference between 2024 and 2020, you don't have a president sitting in the White House who is contesting the election. He will probably contest the election, but he'll do it from Florida, not from Washington. But I do think that there's a prospect of confrontations at election centers where votes are being counted. We saw some of that in 2020, and I would expect there's a risk of that in 2024 as well.
Well, we very much enjoyed your comment on X about having their dogs or cats eaten was not a top issue on voters' minds. A reference, of course, there to the presidential debate. What exactly have been the real concerns on voters' minds then? And are they different from in other elections then?
We are seeing we're a divided country. That's not new. I think we're divided a little bit in different ways this time. Far more cultural than ideological, and we'll have to see how it plays out. I think Donald Trump, from 2015, where he rode down that escalator in New York, until now, has broken just about every cardinal rule of American politics. He has crossed so many red lines. The real question is, when the dust settles, days after the election, what is the future of American politics? Some of that will depend on the result. But if Donald Trump wins, you're going to have 4 more years of this coarseness that he's brought to campaigning. If Donald Trump loses, you have the prospect that the Republican Party can take itself back from this MAGA phenomenon. That it will not be easy. It will take some time. American democracy, depends upon 2 healthy political parties, and right now we don't have that. And I think for the interest of the country long term, we have to find a way to regain that.
Just last, I want to ask you, because of course you worked for the Obama administration, and I want to ask your opinion on how valuable you think former presidents like your former boss, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, have been to Kamala Harris, because she's lucky in having 3 living presidents behind her, as well as Jimmy Carter, although of course he's not active on the campaign trail. Or do you think perhaps there's a sense that a former US president can be more of a liability than an asset?
I don't think so. This is not 2000 where Al Gore, tried to figure out how to deploy Bill Clinton and ultimately underdeployed him, and that probably cost him, the 2000 election. We're in a different era, but I mean, the challenge for former presidents is, the Clinton, Obama, they're talking to people who already have a positive view of them. We haven't really heard from, President George W. Bush, in this campaign, either for or against, Donald Trump. So this has been a kind of a one-sided argument, but, certainly, Harris has had an edge in the sense of presidents, entertainers, other, figures who have appealed to specific constituencies on her side. Donald Trump have had some of that. Elon Musk, for example, much admired for his engineering brilliance. It's all about turnout here. To the extent that either President Obama can help with turnout of black voters, whether Taylor Swift can help with turnout of young voters. We'll have to wait and see for the dust to settle to see what the impact ultimately was.
PJ Crowley, former Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama, thank you so much for joining us.
You're quite welcome.
Kamala Harris is potentially just days away from winning the U.S. election and becoming the first woman of color in the White House. But who is the United States Vice President, and what would her presidency look like? Benji Hire has this profile of the Democratic Party nominee.
My mother was very well aware that she was raising two black girls to be two black women.
Kamala Harris, born in California as the daughter of immigrants, an Indian mother, a Jamaican father.
She's scheduled to be in
a career in law.
San Francisco District Attorney Kamala Harris joins us live from the city. Good morning, Kamala.
Good morning, Ross.
A district attorney, then the Attorney General of her home state, a self-described progressive prosecutor.
Deputy District Attorney. Or read or...
She was sworn in as a senator in 2017.
We cannot possibly move forward, Mr. Chairman,
I extend a very warm...
Gaining a national profile for her pointed questioning of administration officials during congressional hearings.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
Her own bid for the Oval Office in 2019 was short-lived, dropping out and instead becoming the first black woman on a presidential ticket.
We did it, Joe.
Winning in 2020 as Joe Biden's running mate.
But while I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. On this vote, the yeas are 50 and the nays are 50.
As vice president, she cast the deciding vote in Congress on major legislation and campaigned for abortion rights.
We won't go back! We won't go back!
Today, our daughters know fewer rights than their grandmothers. This is a healthcare crisis.
But she was also tasked with tackling the influx of illegal immigrants at the US's southern border, an issue that remains to this day. When President Biden ended his re-election bid earlier this year, he endorsed his number two.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
And she was confirmed as her party's pick for the Oval Office.
America, for too long, we have been consumed with too much division, chaos, and mutual distrust. It doesn't have to be this way.
Kamala Harris has presented herself as the candidate of the future, of freedom, of hope, key themes in her campaign. At this major rally, just a few meters from the White House, just a few days out from the election, she drew a stark contrast between herself and Donald Trump.
Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail, I'll give them a seat at the table. I have been honored to serve as Joe Biden's vice president. But I will bring my own experiences and ideas to the Oval Office. My presidency will be different because the challenges we face are different.
Challenges like the economy, the cost of living, a top priority for voters, and foreign policy, with ongoing wars in Europe and the Middle East.
I think under a Kamala Harris presidency, we are likely to see more of a robust U.S. response to Israel.
Harris has towed a careful line on these divisive topics. Her message of unity is one she believes will be enough to get her over the line next week. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Well, to discuss the US election a little further, I'm joined now by the former Democratic Congresswoman and former CEO of the Democratic National Committee, Amy Dacey, and also by Pastor Mark Burns, Donald Trump's pastor. Great to have you both with us. Really appreciate you taking the time. I think you're going to have different opinions on quite a lot of the subjects we're going to be discussing. But let's start by talking about what we just heard in that report is the top concern amongst American voters, and I'm talking about the economy. Amy, let me put it to you first of all. Are Americans better off now than they were 4 years ago?
Well, some are, and there's still room for more to be done. And I think that's what the Harris campaign is trying to elevate. While there's been certainly some significant advances during the Biden administration, she has visions about cutting taxes for middle-class families, making rent more affordable, growing small business and investing in entrepreneurs, taking on bad actors, bringing down costs. So she set out a real distinct set of policies to move forward, capitalizing on some of the advancements that you saw through the first Biden administration.
Pastor Burns, what's your opinion? Americans better off now than they were when Donald Trump left office?
Well, Americans are worse off since Joe Biden's economic policies has helped destroy America. The Green New Deal has almost the cost of living and inflation is all because of the Harris-Biden policies in which Kamala Harris will continue on. And Americans see this. I bet the fact that 46,000 manufacturing jobs just last month and 85,000 jobs in the past 6 months are killed because of the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris policies. And so the American people are realizing that manufacturing in America is at all-time decline. But under President Trump, that was the complete opposite. And under President Trump, jobs were growing amongst the black community. The historical low unemployment rate amongst black people, amongst Hispanic, amongst women. The prosperity of America was at an all-time high under the Trump policies because, again, he's a businessman. He understands economics, unlike these backstabbing, non-job creating politicians like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Donald Trump understands how to create jobs for Americans, and he done it before, and American people see that he'll do it again.
Amy, backstabbing, non-job creating politicians. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it's the unfortunate rhetoric that you see coming out of Trump and his supporters. I mean, these are some people that have been in public service for a long time. Certainly Vice President Kamala Harris, Governor Walz.
Exactly.
These are people who've been seeing things, with the public service that they've done. And I think this is the destructive narrative that has been created by the Trump presidency, and we can't afford to see it again. There's definitely things that happened, under the Trump presidency. We were in the middle of a global pandemic where decisions made by that administration had terrible ramifications. And the bottom line, he might be a businessman, but he's more, interested in helping out corporate America and the people who make the very most in the country, rather than helping people really with their bread and butter at the dinner table kind of issues that they're dealing with. Even some of the, things he wants to do on trade will not necessarily help. And all the damage that he wanted to do to the Affordable Care, Act doesn't really resonate and understand the everyday challenges that Americans are facing, which definitely the Harris-Walz campaign can address and will address in the next 4 years.
Pastor Burns, I mean, look at it looking at it from the outside in, I mean, we're talking about a country, the United States, with an unemployment rate of about 4%, which isn't too bad. Inflation's down to about 2.4% from a double-digit high a couple of years ago. I mean, is it really that bad?
Oh, it's extremely bad. I mean, again, you got to talk to the everyday people that she spoke about. And I'm happy that the Congresswoman stated that they have been in politics for a very long time. And that's true. They've been in politics for a very, very long time, and nothing has changed. This is why the American people want Donald Trump back. I mean, listen, people start attacking Donald Trump when they don't really have policy to back it up. But the reality of it is, under President Trump, gas prices fell $1 a gallon, right? Gas prices are up under the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration. The Green New Deal has destroyed our ability to become energy efficient and independent, on our own. It is costing us countless of American dollars, and the ridiculous spending in these wars in Ukraine that the Democrats are putting forward, while yet Americans in North Carolina cannot get the funding that they need because FEMA runs out of money. So American lives are dying at the hands of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden for our natural disasters that just took place, while billions of dollars have been sent to Ukraine, backed by Democrat policies. Again, the priority and the narrative shares to the American person is that Democrats care more about illegal immigration, putting illegal immigrants in apartment buildings and in hotels, while our American citizens we're having to donate RVs and recreational vehicles to house some of these people. This is not some poor rhetoric. These are things that are happening right here on the ground. And the Kamala Harris and the Joe Biden administration are so far moved away from the regular American person, the rank and file, the hardworking American that puts on his boots and goes to work every day. They're so distracted from their desire to please foreign policies and foreign governments than the American citizen, which is why the border is wide open, which is why illegals are coming through by the droves. And the American people are tired of it. Again, we're talking about people at the border who are getting kidnapped and raped. Drugs are coming in. Children are being mutilated and being sold into sex trafficking, all under the watch of a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris weak immigration policy. That, too, is affecting the economy, and Americans are tired of it. More importantly, Black people in America are tired of it. I mean, Malcolm X warned us about the white liberal. The white liberal that Malcolm X said is a danger to the Black man. They pretend to be for the Negro, Malcolm X said. They pretend to be for the Black Negro, while they're using the Black Negro. They're using the Black man. They're using it for their own agenda, and they pit the Black man against the conservative, right? This is exactly what we see being played out in American politics, and they're using a black face by the name of a person of color by Kamala Harris, and then they have white liberals like this Congresswoman that is on right now to simply continue to oppress Black people and pushing policies that are contrary to our wealth and our well-being.
All right, let's Donald Trump, first of all, I'm not a member of Congress, and second, he doesn't get to label me as a liberal. He doesn't get to label me and my positions. So well, you are it's fine if he wants to talk about what the Trump administration, potential administration. But it's this divisiveness, certainly, that the leaders of the Democratic ticket are definitely fighting for everyday Americans. It's the self-interest of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance that is really tearing apart the country. So again, I am not a member of Congress, and I don't appreciate to be labeled in any such way as a liberal.
Okay, then excuse me. I thought they said it was a Congresswoman that I was addressing. I apologize. But the reality of it is, the fact of the matter is, you are a white liberal, and you do use the black face. You do use the black voice. You do the Democratic Party uses the black voice, and that's the only way that they could win on a national level is by going after the black vote.
Pastor Burns, respectfully, you raised lots of points just now. Let's listen to Amy Dacian, let her have a chance to respond to some of them. Notably, what you started by talking about, which was wars, money, a lot of money being spent on wars. That money could be better spent at home. How do you respond to that, Amy?
Well, I definitely think that has to be, whoever wins this election has to address the issues that are happening globally, both in Ukraine and also, in the Middle East. It is certainly Congress in a bipartisan fashion that has passed funding that goes to these places. So I think it is a conversation between Congress and a new administration. So there is other people who also make these decisions as we move forward. I don't think that there's any disagreement that there has to be investment made for people who are, in the United States, who are suffering, who are trying to make do. But when asked about those policies, Donald Trump said that he hadn't even really addressed them yet because he wasn't really the president. So he doesn't have solid answers when it comes to this. Certainly, the Harris, Walz ticket has literally put out ideas that will be policies that help people. Let's get, to affordable housing. Let's talk about how we can make sure that the people getting the tax credits are the ones that actually need that. Let's put up a program that helps with college affordability. Let's make sure that Social Security and Medicare are not, torn down. These are the issues they're talking about every day. They're talking about them in the states, in the battleground states, and certainly their volunteers and their campaign operatives are talking about it on the doors. This is very different than what you're hearing in the Trump-Vance, rallies that are happening throughout these states.
Okay.
Well, the answer is very simple. It's very simple. The president has already made his point very clear. We need to stop spending. I mean, we're sending $80+ billion to Ukraine, where that money could have been spent right here to Americans, could have been spent on the border, allowing the Border Patrol to do their job, right? But instead, Democrats want to spend money on making sure that transgenders receive sex changes while in federal prison, paid by us Americans. They want to see that children be mutilated and have their sex changed against their parents' will and be paid for by us, the American citizens. This is the ridiculous spending that Democrats are doing, which has put us in a position to where the cost of living is so much higher for American citizens. She keeps talking about the rich and the wealthy and the tax cuts for, listen, Americans are suffering, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has 4 years. I mean, she is the vice president of the United States of America right now. Why wait till the election? But she could have made these changes now. It is a simple answer. Stop the spending, the ridiculous spending. Stop spending money on illegal immigrants. Stop giving them social programs that they're not citizens, and have that money specifically designed for the veterans of America, for the citizens of the American people. That's how we simply change the economy. But Democrats want to continue to spend. Ridiculous spending on things that has nothing to do about the well-being of the citizens of this great nation.
Social Security, Medicare, affordable housing are all things that our people want, and there should be spending on. So I disagree. I think there's a plan in place. I don't think that there's any vision from the Trump-Vance ticket. And certainly there hasn't been any details showed to us about how they will make lives better. Certainly Donald Trump had 4 years of opportunity to try and make a difference, and he did. And
he did that. He most definitely made a difference. To sit there and suggest that Donald Trump did not make a difference is preposterous. Again, the white liberal is speaking like for the American people. And the reality of
both of you.
Donald Trump most definitely made a difference in the economy.
Pass the bench. Pass the bench.
The American people realize that's why he's leading in the polls. They don't want to go back.
Both of you, can we move on? Can we move on from the economy? In America. We've started off by talking about the economy. I gave Amy the first word.
Killing themselves because of weak
Amy had the first word. Amy had the first word on the economy. Let's move on to another topic, and I'll give you the first word this time, Pastor Burns. Donald Trump yesterday said, "This is a crooked country. We're going to make it straight." Why is the United States a crooked country?
Again, because Democratic policies are spending money or treating foreigners and people who are not citizens and the interests of the global elite instead of the citizens of the United States of America. That's what it means to make America great again, to make America safe again. The massive immigration, illegal immigrants that are coming over. The FBI stated over 700,000 violent crimes are happening a year due to immigrants, illegal immigrants, excuse me. We're talking about rapes and murders and drug trafficking that is happening, kidnapping that is happening right here on American soil because of the Kamala Harris, who is the supposedly border czar, who did a poor job in making sure that our border is protected. Under their policies, That's what Donald Trump means when he says the country is crooked, and we have to make it straight again.
All right, let's let Amy respond to that. Amy, the United States is a crooked country. Donald Trump is going to fix it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that certainly Donald Trump should be having any character conversations around, people of integrity. I mean, this is somebody who doesn't have any. He doesn't really care about, being a public servant and representing everybody in this country. I think that his ego is getting in the way here. I think there's a lot of great public servants that are working really hard to try and solve problems every day. What we need is people on both sides of the aisle to come together and work on these solutions. I think the division and the narrative that Donald Trump creates, that if you don't agree with him, you're an enemy, from the enemy within comments, other things he's made, is not going to help us get through this election, is not going to help us all come together to work on these issues together. You need, in this divided country, in this divided Congress, you're going to need bipartisan support to do this. And so certainly I don't really think that Donald Trump's the leader who's going to get that done. I don't think he's the individual who can make sure that we're solving some of these difficult problems that we're facing, not only domestically, but globally as well.
Okay, Amy, I want to put another question to you. Pastor Burns.
The divisive language that Joe Biden said. So I guess that when Joe Biden said, "You ain't black unless if you vote for for Donald Trump, you ain't black." Right? Again, you give this white liberal the power to say, I guess that's not divisive at all, right? To suggest that a black person isn't intelligent enough and educated enough to vote for policies. We got to vote for emotion. So this is coming from your camp. This is coming from the Democratic camp. It is President Trump who's realizing that when the tide rises, all the boats rise with it. The divisiveness is coming from your end.
Pastor, there is not a single Democrat this week that said that they wanted to point a gun at somebody's face.
She didn't really respond about the policy that President Trump has put forward. She attacked his character. That's what Democrats do. They don't have an answer. They're not talking about, education.
I talked repeatedly about the policies today, Pastor.
They're talking about Donald Trump's character. So she responds to the character, and the people are fed up with it. They realize that it's a foolish ploy that Democrats keep
Okay, if you both speak at once, we can't hear either of you. If you both speak at once, we can't hear either of you.
I was talking, and she started talking, so I want to complete my statement. She was talking about the character of Donald Trump, not about how we making America great again, how he made America great again. It wasn't under Donald Trump that the cost of living went high. It wasn't under Donald Trump that the border has run rampant and people are dying at the border. It wasn't under Donald Trump that the cost of that people are owning home, are not owning homes or owning businesses. It is under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Bidenomics that has caused America to be in this horrible, let me finish, this horrible economic status that we're currently in because of the ridiculous spending of the Democrats that your candidate, Kamala Harris, wants to continue into the next administration. That's why we're winning in almost every battleground state in the early voting. We are winning because America is tired of this weak character assassination attempt by liberals who keep only talking about the character when the reality.
Pastor Burns, we've only got 30 seconds left. Pastor Burns, we've got 30 seconds left. Amy, you're going to have the last word. Go for it.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to the election because I do think that policies, that ideas, that positivity will win out over this negativity and this divisiveness that unfortunately we've been facing for the last 10 years.
All right, we're out of time. I'm really sorry. There were loads of other things I wanted to ask you both about. I think we could have talked all night, but we don't have all night.
We're winning.
Thank you.
That's what
thank you so much.
People know that. We're
all right. All right, Pastor Mark Burns, thank you very much indeed. Amy Dacey, thanks to you as well.
Bye-bye.
Very passionate debate there, of course.
It certainly was.
Geopolitical and economic experts are predicting turbulence on multiple fronts if former US President Donald Trump is re-elected to the White House in the coming days. It has been a long campaign for the former president, whose campaign efforts started not long after losing his bid for re-election in 2020. Our correspondent, Mitch McCann, reports on what a second Trump term might look like.
In the final moments of an exhaustive campaign, Donald Trump is making the final sprint.
From safe states to swing states, Trump has even visited blue ones like New York.
An incredible arena, Madison Square Garden, incredible.
To Republicans, he is the answer to 4 years of Democratic disarray inside the White House. But to Democrats, he's an unhinged threat to democracy.
I do believe Donald Trump to be an unserious man. But the consequences of him ever being president again are brutally serious.
Donald Trump is promising sweeping changes in his second term, including mass deportations of illegal immigrants, an increase in fracking to extract more oil and gas, and a pledge to end foreign wars. But some experts we spoke to are sceptical of his plans. Polling shows the most consequential issue this election is the economy. In an effort to raise revenue and protect American jobs, the former president is promising to impose 10% tariffs on US imports, even on products from America's allies.
So a tariff is simply put a tax, and it's a tax on imports, and it makes imports more expensive for US consumers, but it also raises prices in general as those goods that compete with imports also get more expensive.
There is one glaring exception to Trump's 10% tariffs, and that's China, for whom he is proposing a 60% levy. One economist thinks that figure is purely tough talk to put China on notice, and he's sceptical 60% would be the final figure of any tariff.
The 60% is more a crude instrument. It's a negotiating tool. It's a table stakes to get started. Let's talk from there.
The next president will arrive at the White House while wars rage in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan and Lebanon. Trump says he could solve the Russia-Ukraine war in just one day. And in the Middle East, his party endorses Israel's right to defend itself, but lacks specific details of how to solve the conflict. Professor P.L. De Silva, who teaches diplomacy and international relations, is skeptical that Trump will be able to solve anything.
He doesn't read his briefing notes. He doesn't listen to his briefers. So it's going to be, a big circus act.
But experts and professors are the type of people Trump has rallied against throughout his unlikely and relatively short political career, confident he can prove the doubters wrong again in his quest to make America great again. Mitch McCann, Al Arabiya News, New York.
We now have Mitch McCann, who joins us live from the swing state of Michigan. Mitch, great of you to join us. Now, Democrats won Michigan in every election from 1992 to 2012. Trump broke that winning streak in 2016, but Biden then turned the state blue again in 2020. Any idea which way it might go tomorrow?
Well, nice to be with you from Michigan. To your first point, it has been very close in the last two elections, as you point out. Donald Trump won the state by only around 11 or 12,000 votes back in 2016. He flipped it red for the first time since 1988. Joe Biden then won it again in 2020 by around 150,000 votes. That was still a small margin when you consider it was only by around 3 or 4% that he won. To your second question around whether or not we have an indication on how this is going to go, the simple answer is we don't. It's just so close at the moment. The only way we can sort of forecast or look at the numbers is to look at the polling. And if we look at the New York Times this morning, it has Kamala Harris and the Democrats leading by less than 1% within the margin of error. So the state of Michigan is incredibly close at this stage, and it could go either way.
Well, the state has around 200,000 Arab American voters. Who do you think the majority are voting for this time around?
Well, this certainly has been a major issue ahead of the election here in Michigan. 200,000 registered Arab American voters with roots in North Africa or the Middle East, and many of them have been furious over the White House handling of the war in Gaza, very frustrated with what's been going on there. And to illustrate that frustration is the fact that earlier this year in the Democratic primary, more than 100,000 voters wrote uncommitted instead of ticking Joe Biden's name in the Democratic primary as a protest vote. So Donald Trump has been here trying to court the votes of Arab Americans in places like Dearborn and places like Hamtramck, not far from here in Detroit, in recent weeks. So Donald Trump has been trying to win some of those votes. And when you consider that there is 200,000 people in the Arab American community, and Joe Biden only won the state by 150,000 in 2020, it could prove decisive in terms of who wins the state tomorrow night.
Mitch McGann, thank you so much. Joining us live there from Michigan.
Let's talk a bit more about foreign policy and its implications on the campaign trail and for this election in the United States. And let's talk more specifically about events in the Middle East, and we can speak to the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad Siniora. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Really appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, your country in a very sad situation at this particular moment. Today is the day the death toll in Lebanon passed the 3,000 mark. We were just listening there to our correspondent in Michigan, which is a swing state. It's also a state that's home to more than 80,000 people of Lebanese origin. And I'm just wondering how you anticipate Americans of Lebanese origin voting in this election, considering what's happened in their country back home.
Well, actually, it seems that it is actually divided. Some, they think that something good might come out of Kamala Harris, and some others think that the case would be better with President Trump. Effectively, one has to speak it very clearly that the role that was played by both was very disappointing, and people tend to have a short memory. Well, in fact, one can remember now that the support that was extended by President Biden to Israel is unequaled in history. And they did everything in order to support Israel. And at the same time, did nothing actually to extract from Israel what is the right thing to do in the Middle East. The same thing what happened with President Trump. He is actually the man that came out with the deal of the century, and the deal of the century actually he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and recognized the Syrian Golan Heights as an integral part of Israel at the same time. And in fact, so many things that was done was not the right thing. And in all the present history with the two parties, that they did not come out with any real solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And what really happened most recently during the past year is again telling the same thing, that there is a real problem and it needs to be resolved. Otherwise, I think the situation in the Middle East will continue to be very troubling. And as it seems up till now, that there are plenty of promises are being extended by both candidates. But when they become in office, I think the performance will really lead to nothing. Okay. This is the problem that makes the people and the voters, the Arab voters, they think that they are not really being able to decide which one is the better one.
Okay. I want to ask your opinion about a comment that is associated with this election. A lot of people calling this the most important, the most consequential election in recent memory. And I just want to ask you if you agree with that, and if so, why, given that you are 10,000 miles away in Lebanon?
Yes, because actually this time, these issues are really waiting for a real solution. We have a war that started a year ago in Gaza and the West Bank, and it resulted with about 200,000 injured and dead in Palestine, in Gaza and the West Bank. And here in Lebanon, we have over 16,000 between killed and injured. And the destruction, the number of refugees in Gaza, the number of refugees in Lebanon now, they are outnumbering more than 1/4 of the Lebanese population are actually moved out of their own the domestic houses and residences. So the problem actually is so acute, and it requires to have a real solution, and real solution soon, because things cannot really wait, and things would become very troublesome in the sense that it may drag some other forces into the situation. And what is happening is in fact inviting Iran to meddle more in the affairs of the Arab countries, thinking that they can support the cause of Palestine, while actually they are driven by their own interests. So this is the problem that really requires a real solution. And the United States, in its let's say role in the world and in the Middle East, can play a very important position, role in trying to really push towards a real, just, permanent solution in the Middle East.
Okay, I wanted to ask you about contacts and the importance of building up personal relationships, something that a lot of people say is particularly important in the Middle East. And of course, Donald Trump has been in office already. He served as president from 2016 to 2020. And I'm just wondering whether you think there's an argument for the fact that Donald Trump has got these close ties with a lot of leaders who are still there, like President Putin, like President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you think he's better positioned, given that he's got that wasta, to use an Arabic word, those relationships, in order to bring about some sort of a satisfactory conclusion to the conflict in the Middle East? What are your thoughts?
Well, by all means, actually, it helps. The personal relations among the leaders of the Arab world with the President of the United States is important. I don't deny that he managed to, President Trump, he managed to create good contacts with the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Egypt. This is quite helpful, but I mean, how to translate that into real actions, that is the most important thing. What we have seen from the performance of President Trump is that unlike the promises that were given to these leaders, he acted in a different way. So is he going to perform now differently? Is he going to deliver what he promised or what he's promising now? It is high time, actually, to really have the United States come back to the foundation of its principles that really it stood for over so many centuries, that they are really for just solutions, rather than being in a position to suit this interest or that interest only. I know that there are basic interests of the United States, and at this particular time, it is high time to really have permanent friends in the region and in the Middle East. And this is the right approach to do it, by finding a permanent, just solution to the
And I just want to ask you one
Arab-Israeli conflict.
Yeah, one last question. I mean, and this is sort of almost irrespective of which candidate wins the election. I want to ask you about America's standing in the Middle East. You mention a lot of things there. You mention, for example, Donald Trump saying one thing and doing another. Do you believe that the United States have lost some of their credibility? They've lost some of their credentials in the region for being a reliable partner. Do you agree with that?
Yes, for sure. They have lost a good deal of the respect of the ordinary man, or the layman in the Arab world. They look forward for a real good role to be played by the United States. They did not find the United States has been fair and just in dealing with the affairs of the Arab world. And mind you, actually, you see, I mean, people who have who have been really suffering in the West Bank and in Gaza, and in the Palestinians all over the world, and at the same time, many issues in the Arab world, they really look for some just solutions, fair ones, rather than just little clumsy solutions that are not solutions.
Okay.
So this is the thing that the people in the Arab world are looking for. They like to have good relations with the United States, with what it really stands for, of freedom and openness and justice. These are the things, the values of the United States, and they need to have them implemented in the Arab world. And this is the thing that we are looking forward. I really look forward for the victory of the one who is going to deliver not only what the normal American voter expects from the president, but the world as to actually look forward for the United States to deliver on the just and fair solutions.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. The former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, time now to take a look at how the polls are looking. Well, a recent Siena poll reveals a deadlock over in Pennsylvania, with Trump and Harris each garnering 48% of voter support, highlighting the critical importance of this swing state. Nationally, 538's polling tracker places Harris just slightly ahead of Trump with a narrow 1-point lead. However, this slim margin has been steadily tightening, suggesting that the race could go either way and is more competitive than ever. Across several key battleground states, the back-and-forth dynamic between Trump and Harris continues as both candidates vie for any advantage. In Michigan and Wisconsin, Harris currently holds a small edge, leading by approximately 0.8 points in Michigan and 0.6 points in Wisconsin. These slight leads, however, are far from secure, especially with Trump showing momentum in other critical areas. Trump has gained ground in Arizona, where he now leads Harris by 2.5 points. He also has an edge in North Carolina and Georgia, with a margin of roughly 1.5 points in each. Additionally, Trump maintains a slight 0.9-point lead in Nevada and holds a razor-thin margin of 0.3 points over in Pennsylvania, underscoring the intense competition in this pivotal state. Well, it's now time to get some more with Joe Timon, polling expert at Delta Poll. Wonderful to have you with us here today.
Good evening.
Well, it's a very tight race indeed, of course. And I wanted to start off actually with gender, because Harris is very much bolstered by strong support among female voters. Trump has been gaining ground with Hispanic voters, especially men. How important is gender when it comes to the outcome of this election?
Well, it's potentially hugely important. A lot of attention has been paid to some of the subgroups within the electorate that you've talked about, but some of the data around those subgroups, particularly subgroups of ethnic minority groups, is at best patchy. All polls have a margin of error associated with them, and the smaller that subsample, the larger that margin of error is. And so there's been speculation about, for instance, young black men. Well, that's a tiny subsample, and it's very difficult to draw substantive conclusions from that. And even when you talk about Hispanic or Latino voters, for instance, and men and women within that group, well, Hispanic and Latino voters covers a whole host of different subgroups in terms of ethnicity. You can have Puerto Ricans, you can have South Americans, you can have Mexicans, etc., etc. And they all have very different voting profiles, particularly Cubans in Florida, for instance. So drawing substantive conclusions on that is difficult. But on gender, it's more straightforward because we're talking about much larger groups. Delta Poll recently conducted a survey for the National in the UAE, looking at American voters, and we found that, that Harris had a substantial lead among women. Why is that? Well, at least part of the reason is to do with abortion and the right to choose being an important issue in this election, particularly for Harris supporters and particularly for women. And that's why you have some polls showing a double-digit lead for Harris among women. But of course, then the opposite of that is Trump's lead among men.
Now, speaking of turnout, more than 78 million Americans have already voted. Are we looking at a record turnout in 2024?
Well, the short answer is we don't know. People are extraordinarily bad at explaining their own behaviour, let alone predicting it, and polls are only ever a snapshot of public opinion at the given time. I think that the big boost in turnout that we saw last time is unlikely to be replicated. I don't think we'll hit quite that number this time around, but we may be just below that and perhaps up on the historically reasonably low kind of turnout that you typically see at US elections compared to other similar democracies.
Well, there are polls and there are also stocks, and Wall Street is quite an interesting gauge on who's on top. So what can we learn from movements on the stock market?
Relatively little. What they are responding to, the same as the betting markets, is a combination of partisan behaviour, wishful thinking, and an analysis of where the polls themselves are going. And so when polls move, the stock market and the betting markets tends to move as well. And so it's not that they are necessarily better placed, it's that they tend to be predictions rather than, as I say, polls being a snapshot. But to reiterate, all polls have a margin of error associated with them. We cannot abolish that because it's part of the laws of probability, and similarly you can't abolish the laws of gravity. These are things that just are. And the kind of leads that you talked about in all of those 7 swing states, whether it's 2.5% or 0.3%, they're statistically irrelevant. All we can draw from those polls is that it's very close in each of those swing states within the margin of error, which means either candidate could win.
Well, Trump won Iowa in his past 2 presidential campaigns by more than 9 percentage points. That was back in 2016, and 8 points in 2020. The weekend Iowa poll puts Harris 3 points ahead of Trump. How is this significant? And are there any other sort of states that are looking like they might flip?
Well, it's an interesting question, and many of your viewers may be wondering why pay such attention to a poll in Iowa. The reason for that is that, historically speaking, the poll in Iowa, this particular one conducted by a woman called Ann Selzer, has been very accurate. It's been a very good indication of the picture in Iowa, and from that we can extrapolate a broader picture. Now, Iowa is a very white state, and so it's demographically very different from the United States as a whole. But if we are seeing those kind of trends over the entire country, then that indicates a very strong position for Harris, at least among white women, and that will have big implications in many of those swing states. But it is just one poll, and one of the most important lessons we're taught as professional pollsters is not to focus on just one poll, to focus on the broad trends and what we're seeing more widely. And what we're seeing across all of the polls that have been conducted, including the one that I mentioned that was conducted for the National in the UAE by Delta Poll, is that Harris is, we think, ahead on the popular vote. In other words, the voting across the entire country taken as a whole. But it is too close to call in those 7 swing states, because it's not about who wins the most votes, it's about who wins the most what are called electoral college votes. Those are allocated by the 50 states and the District of Columbia.
Sadly, we are going to have to leave it there. Some brilliant insights, though. Thank you so much to Joe Timon, polling expert at Delta Poll. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? Hearing that too close to call refrain we're hearing from a lot of people we've been speaking to here at Al Arabiya News. Let's get some more analysis now. I'm joined by the retired 4-star general who served as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, General Philip Breedlove. Great to have you with us once again. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. loads we can talk about with regards to foreign policy, but I'd like to start by talking about Ukraine, because, of course, whoever wins the US presidential election must, you said, I think it was you who said that whoever wins the election must remember that capitulation to Russia's ambition is not the way forward. That's to quote you. Are you concerned that Donald Trump would capitulate?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I really don't like doing politics in public, but we can talk about policy. And what we hear from Mr. Trump's position is that he will end this war very quickly. That is concerning in that if he is truly going to negotiate with what we know about Mr. Putin is not talking at all about giving up anything in these negotiations. It's all in for Putin sort of answer. That would lead to a capitulation if we are going to end this war in 1 day or 2 days. And capitulating would be a problem. I think the history of 08, of 14, and now of 24 would tell us that if we continue to reward bad behavior, which we did in 08, and if we reward bad behavior like we did in 14, and now we capitulate and reward bad behavior in 24, we're going to get more bad behavior, not good behavior.
But it is often said that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have got a good working relationship. Some would call it a respectful relationship. I mean, clearly relationships have a part to play, don't they, in all of this?
Well, here's what I would say. It will play out. We will see very straightforward if this quote-unquote relationship returns an end product which says Russia gets everything it's asking for, then the relationship did not affect the outcome. Mr. Putin affected the outcome. And so I think we'll see if in fact, Donald Trump is elected, former President Trump is reelected, I should say, then if he is able to get concessions from Russia, as well as concessions from Ukraine, then that would mean that, yes, the relationship had something to do with it. But if Russia gets everything they want, which would include a ceasefire, because Russia is really struggling right now. You see that they're adding North Korean soldiers to help them in their fight. Mr. Putin desperately needs a pause to refit and get ready to fight again. And so, it'll become readily apparent. Did the relationship have something to do with Mr. Putin making concessions along with Mr. Zelensky making concessions?
Indeed, that's if Donald Trump wins. Let's look at another scenario in which he doesn't win. Kamala Harris becomes the first woman president of the United States. Do you anticipate more of the same, a continuation of the Biden playbook, if you like, when it comes to US policy towards Ukraine?
Well, that's also tough to read or tough to say. She hasn't said much about what she's going to do. Pundits and some of her surrogates are saying that the policy would not change. Some pundits are saying that the policy wouldn't change drastically, but she would be a little less enthusiastic for supporting Ukraine. But once again, we're going to have to see what happens because, again, she has not said much about what her policy is going to be.
Let's talk about NATO, a subject close to your heart. There is some concern in the ranks of people at NATO about a second Trump presidency. First of all, do you think those concerns are valid? Do you agree that there are concerns? And what do you think that a second Trump presidency would mean for the strength of the NATO alliance?
So I would agree that there are concerns. Mr. Trump's rhetoric sometimes are, well, you said the word, they are concerning. But here's what I like to remind people. There was a lot of tough rhetoric by Mr. former President Trump during his run-up to his first election where he was elected. And lots of tough language was used. But the facts are this. During Trump's time as president, our troop presence in NATO increased. Our investments in our NATO establishment, meaning the infrastructure and so forth of U.S. troops, increased. And our number of exercises and participation in exercises increased. So for all of the worry and angst because of some tough language, what actually happened during his 4 years is our investment and troops in Europe increased. And so I think that we will once again have to see how his sort of words and language match what actually happened on the ground in Europe should he be elected.
So just to sort of paraphrase you there, it sounds like, you know, a dose of tough love from the then President Donald Trump and some bitter pills or whatever other cliche you'd like to use to describe this actually had the desired effect.
Well, look at it now. I mean, over 20 nations now are meeting their spending goal. So we have to absolutely agree that there was some tough love language. Got it. Some of it very tough love language. But in fact, he's the only president in the last 40 years to get NATO to increase its spending. So once again, I think that many of us might disagree with his tactics and his tools, but at some point it's a little hard to argue with what turned out.
Let's talk a bit about events in the Middle East, which is of considerable interest to our viewers. Let's talk about Iran first. Do you think the chances of a direct conflict between Israel and Iran would be higher or lower under a Trump or Harris presidency? What are your thoughts?
I don't really believe that either president will make a huge impact on what's happening there. I think that what is very clear is that Iran is the world's biggest sponsor of terrorism. Iran knows that it cannot beat Israel, so Iran uses its proxies to fight Israel and continue to fight Israel and stir up Israel so that Israel will respond. And then the world press and the world governmental systems will work to push down on Israel, which is what actually Iran wants most.
So do you think Donald Trump, carries more leverage when it comes to influencing Israeli policy? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we'll see. You know, we talk about deterrence and how we would deter Iran or any other nation for that matter. We could go right back to the discussion about Russia. And in a military man's mind or a military woman's mind, the two things that we talk about in deterrence are capability and credibility. The United States and the West have great capability, immense capability. But our credibility at standing up to the autocrats of the world is really actually very low. Look at all the actions that America itself has taken in the defense of Israel. I said a very important word there, the defense of Israel. America lost soldiers to an Iranian proxy. Did America strike Iran back? No. It struck the proxies. America has not taken action against Iran. And so I think that Iran understands that whole dynamic, that they can continue to attack through the proxies and things and not expect that there would be an American response. So this is about Iran and Israel. And I believe that either president is going to struggle with changing Iran's approach unless they regain American credibility at increasing the cost on Iran, not on its proxies.
Just before we crossed to you, General Breedlove, we were speaking to a former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Fouad Siniora, and I asked him whether he thought that the United States had lost credibility in the region, and he said he thought it had, not a reliable partner, roughly is how I could paraphrase him. Does it surprise you to hear people of that level in regional politics saying things like that about the United States, or do you think he's got a good point?
No, it does not surprise me. I mean, this is a tough problem. Remember that Hezbollah has much to do with how Lebanon runs. I'm not going to make the judgment that more learned Middle Easterners make, that Hezbollah is actually in charge, but I would just say that in all of these problem areas around Israel, in Lebanon, and as it relates to the West Bank and Gaza, the terrorists are in control of many functions that serve the people. And so who is holding the terrorists accountable? How much money? How many relief trucks? What is Hamas doing for the people in their country that they run? What is Hezbollah doing for the people in Lebanon, in a country that they largely control portions of the country? And what tends to happen here is the governments blame governments, and rather than we all recognize where this problem begins. All roads begin in Tehran, and all roads go back to Tehran. The terrorists in Lebanon need to be held accountable. The terrorists inside of Gaza need to be held accountable. And yet the world faces to the governments. And that's why the United States is seen as being unreliable, because the people are really of the world, not just the people on the ground, are not holding the terrorists accountable for their terrorist actions.
Okay, well, we're out of time, I'm being told. So I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, General Philip Breedlove, for speaking to us here on Al Arabiya News. Thank you.
Well, as Americans go to the ballot box to elect their next president, our correspondent Sarah Coates has more on who Israelis want to see in the White House on January the 20th.
2 days to go.
We will make America safe again.
It's an election that will have major consequences in the Middle East. With the war in Gaza continuing after more than a year of fighting, hostilities increasing between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the shadow war between Israel and Iran now a direct conflict.
I think there would be some differences in the way the new president would respond to Israel. I think under a Kamala Harris presidency, we are likely to see more of a robust U.S. response to Israel. And under the Trump presidency, basically a carte blanche response to Israel. So I think from the Israeli point of view, they would favor to have Trump in office because it just gives them the freedom to act the way they wish.
Polls show the majority of Israelis agree, with 66% saying they prefer the Republican candidate. On the streets of Tel Aviv, which is often seen as more liberal to the rest of Israel, opinions are mixed.
Trump, yeah.
Why is that?
First of all, I think Trump is better than Kamala. All the stuff he did before, and that I would say that it's connected to the Israeli people.
I want Kamala to win because she's like a normal democratic politician, whereas Trump, he's not even a Republican, he's a complete fascist. The United States is the leader of the free world, they say, so I think everybody should be worried.
And I want to say, this year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction in Gaza.
Over the past few months, Kamala Harris has been outspoken about ending the war in Gaza and increasing the amount of aid to the besieged Palestinian enclave. While Donald Trump has said in the past he doesn't support an immediate ceasefire. During his time in office, Mr. Trump pushed through a number of changes favouring Israel, like moving the US Embassy to West Jerusalem and formally recognising Israel's annexation of the occupied Golan Heights. Arab nations have also been pushing the United States on building a path for a two-state solution, but neither candidate has put that issue toward the top of their agenda. Seen as potentially the only way to end the cycle of bloodshed between Israelis and Palestinians. Sarah Coates, Al Arabiya News, Tel Aviv.
With just one day to go until the US presidential election, America's allies across Europe are watching with interest, with potentially major impacts on European foreign policy decisions. France and the United States have been key partners for more than 200 years. And outgoing President Joe Biden visited France this year to mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings in World War II. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
A stone's throw from the Élysée Palace in Paris, the Stars and Stripes flying over the United States Embassy. On November the 5th, the French president will be among millions of people in France waiting to see who will be the next incumbent of the White House. The vote is taking place an ocean away, though, and people in Paris feel ambivalent about the result.
It's definitely Trump, because President Trump supported Morocco in the Moroccan Sahara affair.
I know who Kamala Harris is, but I haven't followed her program. And honestly, having a woman president, why not? Women can lead very well too. I have no problem with that.
The current US president's most recent visit to France was in June for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. But with Joe Biden not running for re-election, France will have to deal with a new face from next year.
The US elections are extremely important for France because the next president in the White House is going to have a significant impact on the transatlantic relationship. This is particularly important at a moment where Russia is waging war against Ukraine and where NATO is critical for ensuring European security.
France and the United States forged their Republican revolutionary paths together, but there are present-day challenges in their relationship.
Lebanon is a former French colony and some 20,000 French citizens live there. President Macron has been taking a firmer line with Benjamin Netanyahu in recent weeks, and the conflict in the Middle East is one possible area where the two old allies of Paris and Washington are moving apart.
France is a major holiday destination for American tourists, with 5 million coming in 2023. The Old World monuments and museums are a must-see. And the Netflix show Emily in Paris has encouraged even more American interest in the City of Light. That show might have been renewed for another season, but on November the 5th, the world will see if the Democrats get a second straight term in office, or if the American people hand the keys to the White House back to Donald Trump. Ross Cullen, Al Arabiya News, Paris.
OK, we're going to talk now about what most people agree is the #1 concern on voters' minds in the United States as they cast their ballots, the economy. To tell us more, we can speak to businessman, investor and star of Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. That famous phrase by James Carville, who was a strategist for Bill Clinton, he said, "The economy's stupid," and I think that phrase is used in every single election, probably everywhere in the world nowadays. Clearly no change to what voters consider most important since that phrase was coined 32 years ago. Let me start by asking you this. Are Americans better or worse off than they were 4 years ago?
Well, I think the only people that matter in answering that question are now sitting in 43 counties in 7 states, because they are going to decide who becomes president. It's a remarkable system, the electoral system, but it's been identified now. The new president will probably be elected by around 40,000 people out of 300 million. And so the intensity of this last day can be seen by where these candidates are going, 4 and 5 stops in each of these counties if they can, or their surrogates. The problem, both sides have issues, obviously. Trump is probably winning on the border. He's winning on the economy. She's winning on the abortion issue, which will never get settled in the U.S., as you're well aware. And it's just an unknown, because one of the challenges on this electoral cycle is that the polling data, which is getting worse every cycle. 30 years ago, the polling really told the story. Today, it's impossible. I'll tell you why. When you poll a county with 200,000 people in it and you get 1,200 of them on a panel on the internet on their cell phones, the margin for error is as high as 4%. However, neither candidate is ahead by more than 2%. So the data is effectively useless. It's completely useless. And now everybody's going into this election blind. My forecast of what's going to happen is these 7 swing states will go binary, one way or the other. We will know by 3 o'clock in the morning of the 6th of November who's going to be president. That's my take. I don't think it's going to be that close, because one side's going to blow out the other on the swing states. I just don't think it's that close. I think people have made up their minds. Which mind they've made up for which candidate, nobody knows.
Well, there's been one survey, actually, by the Associated Press that states only 38% of voters think that the national economy is doing well. And when you drill it down by party, 85% of Republicans view the economy as doing poorly, while 61% of Democrats view the economy as doing well. So why is there this huge mismatch between perception and reality in the US about the state of the economy?
Because the stock market is hitting new highs. That's the pro story, the economy measured by the stock market. But most people don't care about the stock market when they can't buy chicken or fish or meat for their families. Their gas prices have doubled since the pandemic. And their cost of housing, whether it be mortgage rates or rental, is up 30–40%. And so that's a different economy. And that's the economy that you have to worry about in the 43 counties. If you are living, and as a comparison, off the average American salary of $68,000, you are not doing better, because every input cost you have to stay alive has gone up. And you're not happy about it. And I anticipate those people are probably going to vote for Trump. How many of them? We don't know yet. And there's some really interesting research that's come out recently about weather being the most important factor in deciding elections. For example, in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, where if it's bad weather, that favors the Republicans. If it's a sunny, shiny, warm day, that favors the Democrats more than any other polling data does. So you just don't know till tomorrow. Is it going to rain? Is it going to be cold? Who knows? So all of these factors are thrown into the mix. If you're scared about your safety, because in the U.S., there's a lot of stories about 10 million immigrants, many of them illegal, that have come in since Harris opened the borders, or maybe you should say Biden-Harris administration opened the borders, that's a big issue to you. But if you care about abortion, you probably are going to side with Harris. And again, nobody knows. And so even the betting markets in the last few hours, which were often considered to be the best way to look at the forwards in terms of the next 24 hours, they're all over the map. This is the most interesting election cycle I've ever seen. It's total chaos.
Well, continuing with these polls, the New York Times poll also revealed that 52% of voters trust Trump to handle the economy, compared to just, well, not just 45%, but 45% for Harris. So in your opinion, which candidate do you think is holding the better cards, do you think, in this regard, especially when it comes to the economy?
I'm a policy guy. I don't care about candidates, because they're only going to be there for 30 months of any kind of relevance, because by the time they're lame ducks in the last year. So I don't care who gets in the White House. What I care about is what are the policies. So here's the difference. I've done a lot of work on the difference in the policies between the Trump mandate, what it could look like, and what the Harris mandate said she's going to do. In the case of Trump, and the best way to look at this is on the things that matter to the economy. After all, the only job that the president has in the United States, actually, is to keep alive the American dream. It's the #1 economy on earth. It's the #1 export of the American economy. Not energy, not technology, it's the American dream. There's a reason people lose their lives underneath rivers and crossing barbed wire to try and get in the United States. It's the American dream. And so that's their job. Now, which one perpetuates the American dream? By buoying the economy. So in the Harris plan, she's going to raise corporate tax rates from around 21% to 28%. That's the highest tax rate increase in American history with the fell of one pen. That's never been done before. That's going to take a major hit to the S&P 500 earnings. That's probably not a good thing. But her reason for doing it is, well, I'm going to decide which sectors of the economy are important. I'm going to take money from all of them and give free money to sectors like chip manufacturing, as we saw in the Chips and Science Act. So she's more of the Soviet-style central planning. Maybe you like that, maybe you don't. Trump, different. He's going to try and lower corporate tax rates so that every single economy basically gets a better chance. All 11 sectors get a better chance at what's going to happen in terms of their ability to compete. So it's jump ball. I prefer that. So I prefer that policy. Immigration policy is different. I like Trump's idea of reducing energy input costs because that reduces inflation. So right now I prefer the Trump agenda, and we'll see what happens tomorrow.
And Kevin, does your preferring the Trump agenda when it comes to the economy include tariffs? Because, of course, that's a word that Donald Trump even says is his favorite word in the English language. And I'm just wondering whether you think the American people fully understand how tariffs work. Because, you know, in the past when we've seen tariffs imposed, they've triggered retaliatory tariffs. And who suffers then?
Well, actually, tariffs have existed in the Harris and Biden administration. They never took off the Trump tariffs. There's a bill going through Congress here in the United States, which is a equivalency act for tariffs. The idea is that whatever tariffs another country puts on, we do exactly the same. So a level playing field idea. So, for example, the Germans put a 10% tariff on automotive. We do the same thing. All that works because most of the trading partners understand it. NAFTA takes care of Mexico and Canada for the U.S., except China. China came into the WTO in 1999, and they have not played by the rules of that agreement ever, not 1 year, ever. So if you do business there like I do, we don't have any IP rights. Our IP is stolen. We don't have any reciprocal rights on litigation in their courts. We cannot buy land the same way they can in the United States. The compliance costs for them when they bring their companies public on the NYSE or NASDAQ are lower because they don't comply. And frankly, for most of us, we're a little unhappy with that. And I'm an advocate for raising tariffs on a temporary basis to 400 or 500% on China until the Supreme Leader flies to Washington and just says, I'm just kidding. I want to get a reciprocal deal worked out because China only understands the stick. And I think there's quite a bit of frustration. And the one that is most glaring to American citizens is TikTok, which was made illegal midnight, January 19th. It's considered Chinese spyware on a bipartisan basis of Congress. They would like to see it shut down. They're going to get it shut down. And the Chinese are litigating the American people in their own courts. You can't do that in China. You can't go back and litigate the Supreme Leader. And so this kind of tension is going to just boil over after the election. It's a non-issue till after the election. But I anticipate this reciprocal act, this reciprocal tariff act, will somehow get passed with the exception of China, where the pressure is going to be on because the U.S. and China are in economic war against each other. And I think it's a good thing that it gets resolved now. So I think tariffs are temporary. If Germany wants to remove automotive taxes, it's very easy. They just drop their 10%, the U.S. will drop theirs.
Well, a huge thank you there, Kevin O'Leary. Thank you so much for your insights and for being with us here today. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned as our coverage continues with Riz Khan's election special next.
We will both be back at the same time tomorrow with more on the US election as Americans go to the polls to decide who's going to be the 47th President of the United States.
Be sure to join us then, and goodbye.